Namaskar. It is a few weeks now since we completed the study of all the 36 Tattvas of Tantra. In the context of these 36 Tattvas, let us try to understand 4 more topics. These topics are on soul, mind, law of karma, and rebirth. Most people are fascinated by these topics, but for many, these topics are deeply enigmatic. These 4 topics are interrelated in one way or another. Moreover, with a correct understanding of the soul, the mind and the law of karma and rebirth, we can conduct our personal lives more purposefully. In this session, we will first try to understand what the soul is and how the mind works in the light of Tantra. Then, in the next session, we will move on to the laws of karma and the concept of rebirth. By understanding the 36 Tattvas, we come to understand 2 important things about who we are and what our purpose in life is. The first milestone of the spiritual journey is the realization of who we are. Once that realization is in place, the next milestone is identification of the purpose in our life. We can reach both these milestones through the 36 Tattvas of Tantra. Tantra has taught us that we are not the body, we are not the mind, we are the consciousness. Tantra has taught us that we are consciousness. The mind that we cannot see with our eyes and the body that we can see with our eyes are both only 2 kinds of tools that consciousness uses. One is an internal tool and the other is an external one. What is consciousness then? Consciousness is our personal inner awareness of being aware. It is our self-knowledge that we are conscious. Where did this consciousness come from? In the beginning, all there was the absolute supreme consciousness that Tantra called Parasamrit. It is in this supreme absolute consciousness that everything exists, everything happens, and everything in the end returns to. What is the nature of this absolute supreme consciousness? Absolute supreme consciousness is ever existing, all knowing, ever blissful consciousness inherent with will, knowledge, action, power to create anything at all instantaneously. Tantra calls the supreme state of consciousness the Shiva state of consciousness. Tantra says that we are all actually this Shiva state of consciousness, but we do not experience it because we are a severely limited step down version of it, which Tantra calls Purusha state of consciousness. This is indeed a huge difference. The comparison is like that of the brightness of the brilliant sunlight and a 0-watt bulb. We need to understand these 2 states of consciousness. One is the supreme, ultimate, limitless Shiva state of consciousness. The other is a very limited and severely stepped down Purusha state of consciousness, which is the average level of consciousness of an average human being. Thus, although we are all essentially unlimited and supreme Shiva consciousness, right now we are in an extremely limited and mundane Purusha state of consciousness. We are consciousness blindfolded and we are brought down to this world of Maya or the world of illusion. This is what Tantra tells us about the current state of our existence. And what is Maya then? Maya is defined in Tantra as Niyate iti Maya. That which limits is Maya. After having brought down blindfolded to the world of Maya, what was the next thing that happened to the Purusha state of consciousness? Purusha consciousness was then given 3 subtle tools called the mind, intellect, ego. These 3 are the 3 internal instruments provided to help and assist the limited Purusha consciousness to navigate and survive in this world of Maya. As an analogy, we can say that the limited Purusha consciousness is now guarded by a 3-layered overcoat. Why are these tools given? Because Purusha state of consciousness is limited and the triad of mind, intellect, ego can be effectively used to understand and interact with the world of Maya around us. We need to understand this very clearly. We are consciousness in Purusha state. We are not this mind. we mistakenly think that we are the mind, which is wrong. Tantra says we are not this intellect or ego either. These three are just the internal tools that we, the consciousness, pick up and use. Nor is our body we. When diving to the bottom of the ocean, the divers carry a variety of tools to stay on the ocean bed and work. Our body, mind, intellect, and ego are merely such enabling mechanisms for the limited consciousness to operate in the world of Maya. They are not us, they are our possessions. Initially, to start with, the Purusha state of consciousness acquires only mind, intellect, and ego to begin its life in the world of Maya. In this context, we must note that Tantra speaks only of the three inner tools called mind, intellect, ego. Advaita Vedanta speaks of a fourth internal instrument called Chitta, which is the storehouse of retained memories. In Tantra, memories are retained as a molecular layer on the mind's surface, and it is not counted separately as a fourth tool. As the life in the world of Maya intensifies and deepens with action-reaction cycles, at some stage of intensity, Purusha state of consciousness acquires a fourth tool, a visible physical body. And the consciousness is now born in the physical world with a body, mind, intellect, and ego. When the limited Purusha consciousness that we are comes into this world of Maya and acquires the mind, intellect, ego, Tantra changes its name to Atma or Jivatma or the soul. We are all souls with a body. Thus, the limited Purusha consciousness now becomes the so-called soul. It is an existence with a separate, standalone feeling of a separate I due to the operation of the ego. There are millions of such souls here. Each of us is a soul or Atma of Purusha consciousness, holding a mind, intellect, and ego to start with, and later on a body is added. Then we interact with similar other Atmas, starting innumerable action-reaction activities. That is what we call life. Now let us try to understand in more depth as to how the soul is explained in Tantra. This explanation is based on the Tantric text Pratyabhijna Darshanam in the Kashmiri Saiva tradition. We have already learned that the eternal pure consciousness is called Shiva in Tantra. Energy is the power of that consciousness. It is from that energy that the matter originates. We know E is equal to mc square. The matter is that which comes into existence when the rate of vibration of energy becomes less than that of the speed of light. Why the speed of light? Because consciousness is Shiva and Shiva is light. Energy is nothing but the matter at a vibrationary rate that exceeds the speed of light. That energy matter force is described as Shakti or the dynamism of consciousness in Tantra. In the beginning, consciousness and the energy matter capability of consciousness, that is Shiva and Shakti, existed as one, not two. That oneness is what Tantra called Parasambhit. Due to the urge to evolve, Shakti pushes Shiva out. That is, the power of consciousness pushes consciousness out, thus one becoming two. This is described in Tantra as Mahamaithunam, the great coitus. As a result of this, Shiva and Shakti both flow out. That is, energy matter capability of consciousness and consciousness itself both flow out. Shiva is light, Shakti is a mirror on which reflects the light of Shiva. The entire universe is Shiva reflected in Shakti, meaning the Shakti of Shiva reflects Shiva. The Atma is Shivam or consciousness reflected in Shakti or the power of consciousness. You and I are such reflected consciousness in the power of consciousness. That is, souls are limited reflections of Shivam reflected in many different units of Shakti, which is the dynamic power of Shiva. Let me give you an example to understand this clearly. On a moonlit night, take out 100 pots filled with water. The moon in the sky will be reflected in these 100 pots. But the moon is the same and there is only one moon. Although the moon itself is reflected in the water in the pot, the reflected moon is much limited than the moon in the sky. Similarly, souls are limited reflections of the unlimited consciousness in many different units of the power of consciousness itself. The water in the pot is Shakti, which is the power of consciousness in this example. The moon is the Shiva state of consciousness that is being reflected in the water. The soul is the limited reflection in the water. Water is the power of consciousness that holds the mind, intellect, ego to itself. Both you and I are such Atmas or souls, but holding a Panchabhuta body additionally. In this pot example, our body is the pot. That is to say, each of us is akin to the finite reflections in the pot of the infinite moon. The clay pot is the body. Water is Shakti, standing side by side with mind, intellect and ego. Death is nothing but the breaking of the pot. This example must be remembered because this example will be needed again in the next session when the laws of karma and rebirths are discussed. Now we understand what the soul is. We also know that the mind is one of the three instruments of the soul. Now then, let us see what the mind is and how the mind works. Who is the holder of these three tools? The soul holds the three tools. Who is the soul? The soul is the limited reflection of the unlimited consciousness in a unit of Shakti attached with mind, intellect and ego. Everything in this universe, including our body, is made up of the five elements or Panchabhutas, namely earth, water, fire, air and ether. Bhutas means elements. Here, the element of earth does not mean the soil or the planet earth. The name earth itself denotes the element earth. Soil is an example of the compound earth. The Panchabhutas or five elements reside in the five molecules of smell, taste, form, touch and sound respectively. Molecules are called Tanmatras in Tantra. These molecules are energy fields of different vibratory rates. Many different objects are formed when these five elements come together in different proportions with each other. Sometimes the elements stand alone on its own. For example, the element ether. If we look at the hierarchical order of these five elements, earth, water, fire, air and ether, we can see that on the lower end of the range, the element earth is there. The earth is the densest and the least pervasive, but it is visible to the naked eye. On the other end, it is the subtlest ether which has great pervasiveness, but it is invisible. What does it tell you? The visible matter has very limited freedom and is mostly bound. The element earth is the least powerful amongst the elements. It has very little power and freedom to move. Higher levels of freedom and power are therefore subtler invisible elements. In the progressive order of the water, fire, air and ether. These five elements exist in their five respective tanmatras or molecules. These are Gandha or smell, in which the element earth exists. Rasa or taste, in which the element water exists. Rupa or form, in which the element fire exists. Sparsha or touch, in which the element air exists. And Shabda or sound, in which the element ether exists. It is these molecules that the mind gathers and keeps as a collection and distribution vessel. The mind is the collection vessel for tanmatras. How does the mind collect the five tanmatras? They are collected through their respective five jnanendriyas. Ghanendriya collects the tanmatras of Gandha or smell to the mind. Our physical organ called nose does help in the collection process, but the physical nose is not the one that conveys the Gandha tanmatra to the mind. It is the Indriya which gives the Shakti or the power to smell by taking the Gandha tanmatra to the mind. The Indriyas are the invisible non-physical power pathways that conduct the tanmatras to the mind. It is our everyday experience that we cannot smell anything when we catch a cold, even though we still have our nose in place there. Likewise, Jihva is the Indriya that takes Rasa Tanmatra to the mind. Chakshus is the Indriya that takes Rupa Tanmatra. Tok is the Indriya that takes Sparsha Tanmatra. And Shrota is the Indriya that takes Sabda Tanmatra to the mind. It is only when these Tanmatras reach the mind, the world appears to the soul. There are two other process steps that happen in the mind simultaneously at the same time. The buddhi or intellect examines the tanmatras and it classifies them as good or bad, like or dislike, desirable or undesirable, etc. Then the ahankara or ego examines and classifies these tanmatras again as mine, not mine, me or not me, I or others, etc. The mind is the collections, sorting and distribution tool for doing this work. Cognitive perceptions take place as a result of these activities. For example, when we have a lamp in front of our eyes, we become aware of this external object lamp when the shape, color and the reflected light of the lamp passes through the pupil of our eye and falls into the visual field of our brain. But cognition of the lamp occurs when the corresponding tanmatras pass through the corresponding jnanendriyas and strike on the surface of the mind. The information thus received is checked and classified by the intellect as good lamp, bad lamp, beautiful lamp, or unattractive lamp, etc. It is the work of the intellect that does this classification. Ego will make a second kind of classification on the information received in the mind by labeling the lamp as it is my lamp or it is not my lamp, etc. These two types of classifications can potentially create either positive or negative upsurge of emotions in the mind. Repeated upsurge of intense emotions will result in them getting recorded as memories on the surface of our mind. That is what is called Chitta in Advaita Vedanta or subconscious mind in Western psychology in general. In Tantra, the surface of the mind itself holds the memory of the form, memory in the form of the retained tanmatras. We have huge collection of such memories with disastrous consequences. More on that in the next session when we talk of the law of karma and rebirth. In short, limited Purusha consciousness needs a lot of help to survive and navigate in this world of Maya. Tools like mind, intellect and ego are intended to provide this invaluable help. They are of immense value to the Purusha consciousness when used in the intended manner. The tool ego creates the impression that we are separate individuals, different from everything else around us. That ego-induced feeling that we are different from everything else further complicates our action-interaction cycle. Even when we are caught up in the whirlwind of experiences of dealing with other similar limited consciousness, we must remember that each of us is truly Shiva consciousness. Thus, we must realize who we really are. We must gradually grow and expand our existing level of limited consciousness and return to the Shiva state of consciousness. This is our challenge. This is our expected assignment here. But instead of doing so, we become more and more complex and entangled as a result of our egoic existence. So what happens when we become more complex beings in addition to the instrument of mind, intellect, ego, which are all invisible? We also receive a visible body made of Panchbhutas. This body makes us even more limited by binding us to time and space. Meaning, as we get the body, we become more and more limited. Thus, we are again moving away in the opposite direction of reaching our goal of Shiva consciousness. Life without a physical body was much easier, relatively speaking. With an additional burden of a body, we are in a situation where the distance and severity of our return journey have increased. This is our situation today. Each of us today has a limited level of awareness that separates us from what we are, consciousness. We have also identified ourselves with a memory-laden mind and not with a consciousness. These are great challenges indeed. Understanding that we are souls and recognizing our real nature and understanding how the mind works will mark the beginning of our return journey. May that happen to you. Now, we need to understand karma and rebirth. We can look at them in the next session. Thank you. Namaste.